Okay, welcome to the Mythology panel for the Virtual FantasyCon 2017. I'm here with Amanda Justice and Catherine Perkins, two of our wonderful author participants for our panel discussions. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves and a little bit of what you write?
Catherine Perkins. Among the things I have written is the Fairfolk Chronicles fantasy of contemporary young adult novels, which draws a lot on Celtic, Hawaiian, and occasional Norse and Greco-Roman mythology.
And I am A.M. Justice, and I write primarily fantasy, but I do enjoy reading mythology and myth-based stories, and I have one short story that's been published that's based on the Orpheus, myth of Orpheus.
All right, and I'm Sarah Buhrman, author of the Runespells series, which is based on the Norse Havamal. So Norse myth all the way, woohoo! Okay, so what kinds of, obviously both of you have incorporated a certain amount of mythology into your stories. What gives you the inspiration to do that, and how do you determine which myths to incorporate?
My main work series that is completed anyway, main completed series, is a contemporary fantasy, actually. It's about a girl living in modern day Seattle and finding out she has Fae heritage, right? Of the classic Irish variety. But Seattle is very much a melting pot city. So as she encounters other friends of folkloric and mythological heritage, they're from all kinds of different backgrounds. And so one of her best friends is part Menehune, the engineering fairies of Hawaii, and various other people. And so that's why I really wanted to draw on all the folklores I could just quickly come to mind that represented the various Seattle ethnic groups in the community, kind of thing. And so that with that, there's just, well, it's interesting to just find out how much there is to draw on from all kinds of different places.
The reason why I'm interested in myths and how they get incorporated into stories is just because there really are, universals that can be found in mythology. And so often the characters, even from myths that are set thousands of years in the past, we can see ourselves in them, and they translate well. So the short story, the Orpheus myth short story that I wrote, is actually a weird Western, because I reset it in the Western United States, and I renamed all the characters so that they have names appropriate to that time period. And it's from Persephone's point of view, and as a person who's an observer of this interaction between her husband and this guy that's come to get his wife, and take the wife back to the living world. And I just thought that was really interesting situation for for a witness to tell the story of.
Mm-hmm. Neat. And one thing about what you said about the universality of myths, a lot of times people will bring that up in an extremely narrow sense. Like they'll be talking about it's funny, they'll talk about universality of myths, which is such a broad thing, and they'll think of it only in the most high concept, super educated classes, that sort of thing, in terms of, you have to, have gone to such and such a school to really get a proper mythological reference. But I think it actually, there's a lot that goes through all kinds of, people in a society.
Yes.
And I just, if you don't mind a joke, it's one of the dedications in one of our books. It's dedicated to 3 of the great popularizers of mythology: Edith Hamilton, Joseph Campbell, and Roy Thomas, the writer of Thor number 279. And because, there's the very academic, very high educated level mythology discussion, and then there's comic books,
Right. Exactly. My daughter has got, she's been through the Percy Jackson stage and like reading voraciously every single book that there is. And there's another comic book artist whose work she really loves, and it's the same thing. It's like that's where she knows per mythology. But there's also just, if you read those stories, they're about jealousy, and they're about murder, and they're about, you know, envy, and all of these human emotions that are playing out on this really large scale that I think anybody can identify with. You don't need a classical education per se. You just need to open your ears and listen to the stories that are being told. And I think, to your point, that we lose track of, you know, everything is all about the Greek myths. Rick Riordan's probably at fault for that most recently, but you know, there's a lot of really cool stories in some of the other myths out there, including the Mabinogion and other things that go back to completely different times and places. So I love your idea of the Seattle melting pot of people with supernatural heritage. I think that's great.
Thank you. And I'm really glad that Percy Jackson is getting people reading. I'm in favor of that, but I got to admit, that myth drive me a little crazy as to why on earth Persephone would be in Hades in the middle of summer. But
Exactly.
and thank you very much, and you're very right on all those points. But yeah, now, just to make sure I heard you right earlier, Sarah, you said, now, who were your main focus in the Norse mythology specifically?
Actually, it's the Havamal, which is the poetic and prose text that is supposed to be the words of Odin, as he describes the, you know, everything from the creation to, you know, how he discovered the alphabet, et cetera, and when he discovered the runes, it was 18 runes that came with their own spells, and the Havamal actually goes through and describes these spells. And so essentially my book is about these spells being manifested as a physical pendant, a magical pendant, that the main character has to find and prevent other people from using in order to bring forth the end of the world. So, you know, it's an interesting take on it, I think. But one of the things that I run into a lot is a lot of people who look into the Norse mythology as a rather serious study, are actually really anal about it, and are very, very particular about whether or not the gods would ever come into the modern sphere. And, you know, most of these are pagan groups, so, you know, we're talking about them from an actual, these are the gods perspective.
I didn't mean by invoking comics to offend any Asatru people.
But you know, my personal opinion is that, you know, assuming that Thor is real and Thor still exists, is there any reason that you would not find Thor at a European soccer match? With Loki sitting right behind him, blowing a Vesuvula right into his ear, because yeah, he would. Yeah, I like to consider the idea that the gods are somewhat fascinated by us. I mean, we have this rather unique ability to create these vast forms of entertainment, and why wouldn't they come check that out? We're funny.
I actually had a joke about the gods at soccer matches in one of our books, so I totally agree with you. Not as at them in the present day, but sorry, a kitty needed to be redirected. But in terms, because we have the gods cannot currently make any contact, they are withdrawn as part of a plot point in the thing, but there is discussion of the Dagda and whether he invented soccer or not. And yeah, debate that ensued. But yeah, I'm not an expert in any means on Norse. I'm not like personally a Asatru or anything, or that wasn't my scholarly field in my history degrees. But I do know that you can cause a heck of a debate as, now hold on, is there a difference between dock elves, svart elves, and dwarves? And you just basically introduce that question and tell them, go. And then watch the begin.
And I'm the one sitting there going, yes, but no, but yes, but no, but yes, but no, but yes, but no.
Well, the Orpheus rewrite sounds really cool. And what else? I mean, I know that also you said before Sarah got here, sorry, not trying to talk behind your back, that you also wanted to talk about mythology as a reader, and anything else you wanted to.
Yeah, that's probably because I don't have my writing journey hasn't taken me very far into using existing mythology in my work. Although I am I love retellings, and I also consider myself a rewriter more than a writer. So, and mythology certainly provides a really, really rich opportunity to take various myths and recast them in one way or another. So that might be something that I'll do more of down the road. But just as a reader, I certainly, I probably read Edith Hamilton's Greek mythology book for the first time when I was 10 or 11 years old, and I've reread it multiple times since. And it is just, completely fascinating. The Norse myths, I had a period where I was reading those pretty voraciously. And, I just love, really, really old stories. And, like we were saying, just how those same themes of the human condition play themselves out. And how the gods are so very, very flawed. And if you take somebody like Zeus, for instance, he's usually presented as the hero of the gods, but he's also a serial rapist, and he's got a lot of things that are not really so great that he does. I think that's kind of an interesting character to think about. So, and how the portrayal of the gods also reflects cultural perceptions of what the society at large is like. So that Hera is almost always portrayed, at least in the myths that I've read, she's almost always portrayed as the villain, but really she's the victim in a lot of different scenarios, and has good reason for acting the way.
Hold on, I would say the fact that she considers lashing out at rape victims the thing she needs to do when victimized herself is this whole little kettle of Greek patriarchy that we could go on for ages about.
And isn't that a great example, though, of oppressed people oppressing other people in order to just try to carve out some scope for themselves in the world? So it's a perfect little snapshot of what happens in reality, especially in societies where women are second-class citizens.
And you were saying something about your husband? I thought I heard something, but
Yeah, my husband and I have a joke that any time that somebody does something ridiculous, it's the whole thing is Zeus says, "Hey, look, it's a hole. I'm gonna do it." Don't do it, Zeus. Too late. So whenever somebody does something foolish, we're like, "Don't do it, Zeus."
Oh, dear.
Too late.
I have also seen for the Norse the chart of, has something gone wrong? Is it Loki's fault? Yes. Make Loki fix it. Is it Loki's fault? But also back on the, is it Loki's fault? No. Make Loki fix it. Basically, Loki has to fix all the problems he caused and any other problems as well.
Yeah. That's
Ragnarok issues end up playing a major theme in our work. And that's always, I think, interesting, because I have an acquaintance who is very spiritually involved in all this stuff, and he's a big fan of Odin, but he's actually, he's very anti-civilization, although he thinks that it's an interesting thing. If he's extremely anti-civilization, right? He is an anarchist, but his next best thing isn't what most people who say they're anarchists would say the next best thing is. He's like, oh, well, the next best thing is if we have to have a civilization, it should have universal health care, this, and that. If we're stuck with civilization and can't go back to hunter-gathering, then it should be all of these things and down with the patriarchy. But this one, so he's very big into Odin, but you don't talk to him about Ragnarok. And he's like, battles of darkness and light are a product of civilization. It's very interesting to be fascinated by the ancient Germanic Norse gods and not ever want to talk about Ragnarok.
People tend to latch on to, I think, the things in the stories of mythology that speak most to kind of their own development. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, makes sense.
The things that appeal to where they're going in their lives. So, you know, I always find that interesting to figure out what people find most fascinating in terms of, you know, not only which pantheons they are attracted to in terms of mythologies, but which mythological stories they're attracted to, because I think that says a lot about where they are on their own personal psychological and spiritual paths. There's me being all sagey and stuff.
One thing I think is interesting about the Norse gods in Norse, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it could well be wrong, but the fact that the gods in Norse mythology are not immortal, right?
Well, by certain interpretations, they're all going to die.
Right. That's sort of what I was taught about them, and they all have this sort of nihilistic approach to life, that it's all going to end. Mm-hmm. But yet this sort of like urge that it doesn't matter if it's all going to end, we still got to keep trying and keep living. And I think in a way that's actually a nice philosophy to have.
At least in my understanding of Ragnarok. And again, occasionally people who know a little more about Norse gods in some ways won't even want to talk to me about it. But it's my understanding that one of the things among the attitudes of many of the Norse gods within the stories is, we're all going to die. This world is going to end. But there's going to be a better one. We have to make sure that we go down the best way possible so that whatever appears after this world dies is better off for it, is I think how I've understood those interpretations. And, you know, like there might be a tomorrow, but it's not for us, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing about Ragnarok is it's a prediction from an oracle who is apparently never wrong. And so everybody knows exactly how they're going to die, exactly how it's all going to go down, and exactly what's going to come after. And, you know, at a certain point, you're just like, okay, so what movie are we going to see? You know, because the interesting thing is there are so many gaps between, you know, essentially where they are now and when this prediction begins, that's all that they have to work with is you know, they don't get to choose how they die. They don't get to choose who kills them. They don't get to choose, you know, where they go down from that, but they can choose how they exist in the meantime. And given the incredible emphasis that the Norse put on an individual's reputation, essentially your actions are far more important than the blah, blah, blah that you sit there and spew. You know, I have, you know, this and that, you know, certification and education. You know, people from Norse are like, put up or shut up, you know. So they put a huge emphasis on you have to live your life to prove that you're a good person. And yeah, there's a certain amount of assumption that most people are pretty decent people. But if you don't act like a decent person, your reputation goes down and you have to earn that back. This is not a religion of, you know, well, if you just say sorry in the right way, you're going to be forgiven. No, you have to walk the walk. You can't just make the words. And so, you know, when you have this great big gap of where the gods get to exist and prove themselves to be who they are, then yeah, they already know how they're going down. Meh, okay, great. I got 5 days left, kind of thing. They kind of get this odd freedom to live the best lives they can without having to worry so much about these odd little risks. So I think it's kind of an interesting way of looking at it, because like the Norse gods are never really seen as like, oh, kind of thing. They're kind of like, well, they're obviously stronger and faster and more long-lived, and they have superpowers and things like that. But they're not necessarily better people than the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like this sort of equality kind of feeling when it comes to the gods. Like these aren't just, like things that we can never achieve. These are like people that we get to base our lives off of. These are people that we get to use as role models.
I wonder how between the two mythologies and the two cultures, the interpretation and the acceptance of fate comes into play, because in Greek mythology everything is about everybody trying to subvert fate and get around whatever their destiny is, and always failing miserably, horrible consequences. But the Norse just seem to accept it and then move forward, and it makes for a really different sort of tone of the stories, almost a happier tone in the Norse mythology, where they're like, yeah, we're all gonna die. But the Greek mythology, they're like, no, and then they end up, there's a bloodbath at the end. So.
Yeah. Hey, if you got to go down fighting. The other thing is that, the Greeks lived in the Mediterranean, which is pretty sweet climactically. Mm-hmm. And the Norse are like, winter is coming. You don't get to mess around, because winter will literally kill you. There's a reason that the big bad guys are ice giants, because they will come and kill you. Mm-hmm. You live in Sweden and Finland and things like that, where you get like actual 6 months of winter and stuff like that.
And darkness.
Yeah. You don't get to mess around. You don't get to make your interactions with people superficial, because you got to be in enclosed places with those people for 6 months out of the year. You torque them off, there's going to be some nastiness. You can't have those kind of interactions like that.
I had a professor who said that 3 things tend to be wrapped up a little within a culture: their religion, the predictability of their weather, and their sense of humor. And the more harsh the conditions, the somewhat darker the sense of humor, and that tends to infiltrate the religion as it's developing.
That's pretty cool. That's something to think about as fantasy authors, just to incorporate into your world building too. So, that's an interesting thought.
So there's another aspect to mythology in fantasy writing, and that is creating your own mythology. Have you guys ever considered either creating like an entire pantheon type of thing, unique gods and everything like that, or even just like making up a new story within an existing pantheon to further your own works?
Jeff and I have a novella in the works that has a totally fictional cosmological system of religions and that sort of thing, and it can be a lot of fun. And I admit, in writing make-believe scripture, my tone may be slightly influenced by some of the Norse and Celtic stuff I have read, but it is still fun to take a totally new approach to these ideas from the base. But yeah, that can be really neat. As was in our most recent book, the one that just is coming out this week. We have a lot of people from different backgrounds, not like the fairy heritage ones, but with the practices of mysticism. There's one who practiced some stuff that is still done in tribal areas near where I grew up. whereas there's, you know, practicing Shintos and Onmyotos and that sort of thing, dealing with their cosmologies. And so it was actually fun within that story. Admittedly, the villains were an entirely original, extra-dimensional, infiltrating creation of ours, but they were up against the mystic traditions and cosmologies of a bunch of different religions and mythologies. And so figuring out how all of those would try to work together was a lot of fun too. So in both starting from scratch and trying to consolidate, it can be really interesting to work with.
Well, in my series, the it's a lost space colony, and in the stories take place about 3,000 years after the crew of the spacecraft was marooned on this planet. And so there's a lot of mythology that surrounds the original crew and how they landed there and how they got there. And one of the minor conflicts in my book is a conflict between people who are called heretics, who believed that the records of the spacecraft and how they got to the planet and the initial aspects of settlement are true stories, and people who believe that they're all allegorical, and they've developed a whole religion around their human origin myths around the basically arrival of the spacecraft of their own people coming to this planet. And they consider the spacecraft still orbits the planet, and it's large enough that it's visible as a star. And so the people the majority of the people on the planet believe that this celestial object is a god, and they think that it's the father of humanity, and they believe that the mothers of humanity are these sentient trees that happen to live in a particular forest. And so there's that aspect of this religion that I have basically made up, and then the people who say no, the ship's logs from that time are true stories, they're not allegories at all. And then so there's always that opposition between those people in my books. And it's been fun to create that mythology that surrounds that origin story, and then how it developed into a religion and into a belief system, versus the people who are very adamant that it is that there is nothing to see here, and that there's no truth to that tale, no truth to the deification of this spacecraft that is still orbiting their planet.
That's an interesting perspective. I mean, you know, creating a religion out of, you know, authentic occurrences isn't exactly a new thing, but it's hard for us to go back and see how those kinds of stories might have progressed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially since, you know, so many of them that we have good records of are, you know, often very emotionally protected or defended. You know, it's very hard to explore mythology with that kind of objectivity, because, you know, either it's completely dismissed as fiction, or it's so ingrained as somebody's religion that, you know, it's hard to take that step back and divorce the religiopolitics from it.
I was sort of thinking about, you know, I was really thinking about the debate over the Christian Bible and whether or not it is true, literally true, or metaphorically true. And I wanted to flip that around in my world and say, here are the documents, and they are literally true, but the majority of the population of the planet thinks that they're only metaphorically true. And the mysteries that are in them are like, well, what's a warp drive? That's one of the mysteries, because nobody knows what it is. They have no idea. There's all this, like, there's vast amounts of technology that are mentioned in these documents that people have no idea what they are,
And
So,
instead of just thinking of them as technology to be rediscovered, they're thinking of them as spiritual issues to be dealt with?
yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Interesting. Well, I mean, yes, with so many things in the Bible, if you've ever read the Enuma Elish, it's definitely interesting to get into a cross-cultural comparison there and to see how neighboring but very different cultures told, in some ways, very similar stories in incredibly different ways, you know?
It seems that an absolute fascination with religious history is almost necessary to truly understand how mythology develops and be able to effectively write about it. I mean, you can't just go in and make something up, because it doesn't necessarily mean that it will fit with the culture that you've created or the environment that you've created or the politics that go along with that. You kind of have to understand how those things interact with each other, and of course humor. or you could end up missing the mark in a way that people don't necessarily know how to put their finger on it, but still doesn't quite feel authentic.
It's very true. Who's everybody's favorite myth?
Ooh.
And
Okay.
Tell the story in a brief way.
Okay, my absolute favorite myth to tell in a brief way isn't any of the ones I find the most fascinating or have dealt with in my work, but the myth of Hercules and Queen Alcestis. So, Hercules goes to visit Queen Alcestis and her husband, whose name is suddenly escaping me because that's the way these things go when you're trying to tell a story. He shows up. Queen Alcestis' husband is there, looking dour. He's like, "Oh, Hercules, come in. I'll have the staff get you something to drink. Hi." Which is, that's not a party. Come on, bro. And he's just so annoyed at how, quiet it is, and everyone's so dour and such downers. And so, they brought him his drink, but he just flips the table and is like, can somebody tell me what the hell's going on, bro? Well, Alcestis died this morning. Oh, bleep, string of curse words since we're, being recorded. Dude, I'm so sorry. Bro, I'm going to make this up to you. How can you possibly? I'm going to make this up to you. And Hercules runs out to the funeral grounds, beats up Thanatos himself, telling him, just give Alcestis back. And that is not something that is supposed to work. However, Persephone, watching from the depths in Hades, said, that is adorable. Come on, you got to give him the girl back. And Hades was like, besides, he's going to keep beating up poor Thanatos until you do. And fine, he can have her back. And that is how Queen Alcestis was restored to life on the day she died. But I really enjoy the general obvious image to me of Hercules as a drunken frat bro who, means well, but is constantly screwing up his life. It's a lot better than some other equally valid but much less pleasant interpretations of Hercules.
Well, I could tell the story of how Loki became a mother. I could tell the story of how Thor became gay married, and then a widow, all in the same day. But I'd have to say my favorite actually comes from Japan. And it's the story of Amaterasu. She was the goddess of the sun, and her brother the moon made fun of her, and so she threw a hissy and went and hid away in a cave, which of course nobody wants the sun to be hidden in a cave because that kind of sucks for everyone. But so everybody tries to get her to come out, and finally one of the crone goddesses, Uzume, comes in and essentially strips naked and does the do your boobs hang low dance, which of course causes everybody to laugh hilariously and very loudly. And so Amaterasu comes out of the cave to see what's going on, and everybody lived happily ever after. But I love crone goddesses because they are just sassy and they no longer care, and they're just like,
that's great.
I love the idea that it's a comedy routine that saves the day. So.
Yep. Well, what about you, Amanda?
Besides the Orpheus myth, which I do find fascinating, probably my favorite, it's not so much of a myth, but my favorite character in all of Greek mythology, and just because I feel so sorry for her, is Cassandra. So, and just, you know, to live your life and to be like, hey, this is gonna happen. Don't go in there, girlfriend. And nobody ever listening to you. And
all right. Well, if nobody has anything else to bring up in regards to mythology, then we can do our little outroductions.
Catherine Perkins. This is the first of my Fairfolk Chronicles series, Phallus Fair. And
it's a beautiful cover.
Thank you. And it is currently available. A separate standalone work that draws on some mythological things called Unchosen is also becoming available this week. And I work with the Clockwork Dragon Authors Conglomerate at clockworkdragon.net. Thank you.
I'm Amanda Justice. I write under AM Justice. I have one book out right now called A Wizard's Forge. And you can find me at amjusticeauthor.com. You can also, the short story that I referred to is in the July issue of Sci-Fan magazine, and it's called Round Trip Ticket on the Northbound Train.
All right, and I've been your host, Sarah Buhrman, author of the Runespells series, Too Weird, which has been out for about a year now, and Fluffy Bunny, which will be out on November 30th. You can find me on Facebook under Sarah Buhrman, or the rest of online as AuthorGoddess. Feel free to check out our Virtual FantasyCon booths. Links will be listed below. And don't forget to say hi to all of us. We do love it when people say hi. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to our audience for listening and watching our little panel, and enjoy Virtual FantasyCon.